Shot and killed in Gwinnett County has been identified as an Atlanta rapper. Investigators say the victim was 33-year-old Tevin Hood, also known as T Hood. He was best known for his songs Ready to Go and Percolator. Now, he posted on social media just weeks ago promoting a concert in Atlanta. Investigators say the shooting stemmed from an argument at a house in unincorporated Snellville on Friday night. And officers say they detained a person at that home but have not yet announced any arrests.
She says she was on the phone when it happened, when her son took his last breath, shot 5 times in the back, walking away, leaving a house he would never step out of alive. Now the police call it self-defense, and the family of a reality TV star is right in the middle of it. The night air in Gwinnett County carried that strange weight that only comes when something terrible has happened. A heaviness that sits in the chest before the mind can even understand why. In a quiet neighborhood in Snellville, the kind of place where houses line up neatly and streetlights give off a soft glow, the sound of gunfire had ripped through the calm. Inside one of those homes, a man known to many as T Hood, a rapper from Atlanta whose real name was Tevin Hood, was on the phone with his mother. She says she was speaking to him, hearing his voice, hearing his breath, when the shots came. She swears he was leaving, the argument was over, and he was walking away. She says her boy was headed down the stairs when it happened, and that 5 bullets tore into his back, 2 more into his torso. Her voice shakes when she explains it because she says this wasn't a fight for life or some heat-of-the-moment defense. This, in her eyes, was an execution. And the part that chills her most is not just how he died, but what happened after. The people in that house, the people she believes hold the answers, didn't call the police right away. She claims hours passed before anyone picked up the phone, and by then, stories were already forming. She says a version of events had been decided, one that would be repeated to officers, one that would change the truth forever. The official word would be that T Hood had attacked, that a woman in the house, identified as Kelsey, had been injured, and that the shooter had stepped in to protect her and himself. They would call it self-defense. They would say the GCE. Threat was real, even though his mother insists the danger had ended. She says she knows this because she was there in the only way she could be, through that phone call, listening to her son's final moments. And now she believes there's more than just grief at play. She believes there is influence. She believes the shooter was tied to the family of Kirk Frost and Rasheeda, names familiar to fans of love and hip-hop. She says those names carry weight in Georgia, weight that reaches into police stations and courtrooms. She has tried to speak to detectives, but she says the calls stopped being answered. She says the lead investigator was short with her, even rude, and that doors began closing instead of opening. In her eyes, the system has turned away, and the case is being shaped into something it's not. And then came the audio, a recording of Kelsey herself, saying, "He didn't deserve that." Words that clash with the police version completely. In that recording, she isn't talking like someone who just watched a man try to kill her. She's talking like someone who saw something happen that should not have happened. But when officers arrived, that tone was gone. The story had shifted. Injuries on Kelsey were shown, and the scene was painted as if the shooter had no choice but to act. The man suspected of pulling the trigger was questioned, but not charged, detained, then released. And to the mother of T Hood, it felt like watching justice slip through her fingers in slow motion. She talks about her boy not as a headline but as a person, her firstborn, her pride, someone who had dreams beyond the streets and studios. Now those dreams are gone, replaced with a fight she never wanted, a fight to have his death recognized, for what she says it really was. Around her, others are starting to speak. People in the community whisper about Kirk and Rasheeda's connections, about how money and status can shape the story before it's even written down. The host covering the case calls it a cover-up in plain sight, promising to push it beyond local police, to take it to internal affairs, to the FBI if that's what it takes. This isn't just about one shooting anymore. It's about whether influence can outweigh truth, whether a grieving mother can be silenced by power, and whether the last words of a dying man, heard only by her, will matter in a courtroom, or be buried under a label of self-defense that she believes was chosen long before the evidence was collected. And as the nights pass in Gwinnett County, the street where it happened looks the same, but for the people who know the story, it will never be just another quiet road again. By the next morning, the story had already started to spread, but not in the way the mother of T. Hood hoped it would. News reports came out saying that police in Gwinnett County were looking at the case as a possible act of self-defense. They wrote about a domestic disturbance, about a woman being hurt, about a man stepping in to protect her. They even mentioned that the shooter had stayed at the scene, spoken to officers, and was cooperating with the investigation. To someone who didn't know the inside details, it sounded neat, almost tidy, like a chapter that could be closed once. The paperwork was done. But to those who had been close to T. Hood, to those who had heard the mother's account, it felt like the truth was being twisted. The mother repeated her story, how she had been on the phone when it happened, how her son was leaving, how the shots had come from behind. She couldn't understand how bullets in the back could ever be called self-defense. Then came the part that kept her up at night, the delay. She says it was hours before anyone called for help, hours where his body lay in that house while conversations were happening, while a version of the story was being prepared. When the call finally went out, she believes it was already decided what police would be told, and she believes that decision came from fear, family ties, and power. In the streets of Atlanta and the surrounding areas, people began to talk in low voices about how much influence Kirk Frost and Rasheeda had built over the years. These weren't just TV personalities. They were business owners, well-connected, with relationships that stretched into the city's police circles. Whether it was true or not, the idea that their name could shift the weight of justice was spreading. And as it spread, the details around the shooting got messier. There was talk of a fight inside the house before the shooting, talk that T. Hood had put hands on someone, talk that he had fought with one of the brothers. Some said the little brother had been living there, had seen it happen, and had been beaten badly. Others said that wasn't how it went down at all. The only thing that was clear was that multiple people had been inside the house, and the only man who ended up with fatal wounds was T. Hood. His mother didn't deny that there had been tension. She didn't deny that words had been exchanged. But she stood by her claim that whatever had happened was over, that her son was leaving, that there was no need for bullets to fly. She pointed to the audio of Kelsey, the woman at the center of it all, saying, "He didn't deserve that," as proof that in the moments after, even she knew it had gone too far. But by the time police took statements, that tone had changed. Injuries on Kelsey were photographed. The story was reshaped into one where the shooter had acted heroically to stop a threat, and the shooter himself, whose name has been kept quiet in official channels, was let go the same night. For people watching the case, it was a clear signal that the outcome might already be decided. Still, there were those who refused to accept it. The host covering this story went live again, telling the audience that this was a textbook example of how influence works in small communities with big names. He promised to call Gwinnett County Police directly, to speak to the lead detective, to demand answers about why someone could be shot in the back, and the case still be labeled self-defense. He said if those calls went unanswered, the next step would be internal affairs. And if that didn't work, it would go federal, to the FBI. This wasn't just content anymore. It was a fight. He urged the audience to see it for what it was. Not just about T. Hood, but about what happens when the people who control the story are the same people who know the system's weak spots. And as more days passed without an arrest, the mother's grief hardened into determination. She began speaking publicly, not just to defend her son's name, but to make sure the world knew that she believed a cover-up was in motion. Her voice shook sometimes, but her words didn't. "I was there, on that call," she would say. "I heard him leaving. I heard what came after. And I know my child didn't deserve that." In a world where stories can be bent to fit headlines, she was holding on to hers like it was the last piece of him she had left. The pressure was building, and it was accident. He spoke about Kirk Frost and Rasheeda, about how their years in the public eye and in business had built connections that most people couldn't imagine. He didn't accuse them directly of pulling strings, but he made it clear that in Gwinnett County, names like theirs carried weight. Too much weight. He said the shooter wasn't treated like a suspect. He was treated like someone the system already knew how to protect. The plan now was simple. Call the Gwinnett County Police Department live on air, ask for the lead detective, and demand answers. If those calls didn't get through or the answers were empty, The next step was to contact Internal Affairs, the branch meant to investigate the police themselves. And if that still led nowhere, he promised to take it higher, to the FBI. He called on his viewers to stand with T. Hood's mother, to flood the lines, to make noise until it was impossible to ignore. This wasn't just from the grief that sat heavy on the shoulders of T. Hood's family. It was the kind of pressure that comes when the truth feels like it's slipping away and every hour that passes makes it harder to grab. The host covering the case went live again, his voice sharp, his words aimed straight at the system. He told his viewers this was not the time to be quiet, not the time to hope it all worked itself out. He spoke about how cases like this have been buried before, how families have been left with nothing but pain while the people responsible walk free. He reminded them that the official story didn't match the facts. A man shot 7 times, 5 of those shots in the back, while walking away. He repeated the mother's claim that she was on the phone with her son as it happened, that she heard the moments before and after. He reminded them of the leaked audio of Kelsey, where she said, "He didn't deserve that." A statement that didn't sound like fear of an attacker, but regret over what had been done. He told his audience that the police version, the one that painted the shooter as protecting himself and Kelsey, was a narrative that had been locked in before the investigation was even finished. And in his view, that wasn't biased a campaign for one case. He framed it as a fight for anyone who has ever watched justice bend under the weight of influence and money. Meanwhile, the mother stayed strong in public, even when the pain was clear in her eyes. She said she wouldn't stop, that she owed it to her son to make sure the truth was told. She spoke about how no mother should have to listen to their child's last moments and then watch the story be rewritten. She talked about how quickly the tone changed once police arrived, how the original shock in Kelsey's voice had been replaced by a version that fit the self-defense claim. She said the detectives stopped returning her calls, that the lead investigator had been short with her, dismissive even, and that she felt like they were waiting for her to give up. But she wouldn't. In the streets, in the comment sections, in quiet conversations, people began to pick sides. Some believed the official version, convinced that the shooting was justified. Others saw it the way the mother did, as a killing that was being washed clean by connections and influence. The host told his audience to remember this case because it showed exactly how fast the truth can be reshaped if the right people are involved. He said that if they let this go, the next time it could be someone else's family in the same position, staring at a report that doesn't match the reality they lived through. He said they had to be the voice for T. Hood now, because he no longer had one. And as the live stream ended that night, the fight was far from over. Calls were set to be made in the morning. The names of Kirk, Rasheeda, and Gwinnett County police would be spoken again and again until someone listened. For the mother, it wasn't about fame, headlines, or even revenge. It was about truth. And for those who had followed the story from the start, they knew this. No matter what the police called it, no matter what the report said, there was a woman in Georgia who would not stop until her son's death was seen for what she believed it was. And that, more than anything, is what kept the fight alive.